It's that time again. Time to enter the mysterious world of the supernatural. And tonight I want to tell you a story about a ghost which started off as a poltergeist and ended up as something far more frightening. A ghost which haunted a complete neighbourhood. But as always, let me set the scene. This strange series of events began some 5 or 6 years ago for an ordinary family who lived in a pleasant house on the edge of a large town. The house itself was nothing particularly spectacular, just a simple 1930s style detached building in a road of similar buildings. The neighbourhood was very nice, and most of the people seemed to get on with each other. There was no hint of any animosity or the usual sort of niggles you get these days. Anyway, one Saturday afternoon, the husband of this particular family was outside mowing his lawn. His neighbour was cutting his hedge. As normally happens, they both broke off work to have a chat, and after about 10 minutes, the man's wife brought them both a cup of tea and then joined in the conversation. Suddenly, without warning, the lawnmower started up. It was a petrol one and had been shut off when the two men started to talk. Well, it made the three people jump, and although they didn't quite understand just why the mower had started, the man went to it and switched it off again. The matter was soon forgotten, and after about another 10 minutes or so, the two men stopped talking and went back to work, and the wife went indoors. But when the man tried to restart his lawnmower, it wouldn't fire. Try as he might, the lawnmower refused to turn over. Well, this prompted a comment from his neighbour to the effect that it obviously needed a service, and he came round to see if he could do anything. Once again, as the two men were standing near the mower discussing what could be the cause of the trouble, it suddenly started up on its own. Well, even though they couldn't fathom out what was going on, at least the man could finish his lawn. But after a few minutes, the mower cut out again. And this time, it resolutely refused to start again, even when the neighbour suggested, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, that perhaps if they left it alone, it might start itself, as it had done the 2 previous times. The neighbour resumed his hedge cutting, or at least he tried to. But now the mysterious trouble seemed to have spread to him as well, because his electric cutter wouldn't work. He checked the lead, the plug, the fuse box in the garage, but he could find no cause for the failure. By now, things had gone a little bit beyond a joke, and the two men gave up doing their gardens and went indoors. That night, the man and his wife experienced another strange manifestation. Over the course of 30 minutes or so, all the electrical appliances in the house stopped functioning. First it was the electric kettle, then it was the dishwasher, then the television, then the hi-fi, and finally the electric hot plate. Mystified and a bit annoyed, the man tried to trace where the fault might be, but to no avail. So they settled down to read, and it was only much later that they realized that the lights were okay. It was just the appliances which were not working. The next morning, even though it was a Sunday, the man called an electrician and asked if he could come round and see if he could find the cause of the trouble. The electrician said yes and turned up an hour later. But when he asked the man and his wife to show him what the problem was, everything was in full working order again. Nothing failed to function. Obviously, there must be an intermittent fault in the system, so the electrician set about trying to trace it. But he could find nothing wrong with anything. The wiring was in perfect working order, and there was no evidence of an earthing fault. So the man paid the call-out charge, and the electrician went away. He then decided to finish off his garden, which had been interrupted the day before. His neighbour was outside as well, so the man told him about the strange things which had happened the night before. They had a laugh about it and set about their respective jobs. We now go forward a week, and the same strange thing happened again. Only this time, it happened to the neighbour. Virtually everything in his house stopped working suddenly, except, of course, for the lights. The man went next door and asked exactly what had happened when their appliances had stopped working, and he was able to confirm that there was no difference in the 2 instances. Whilst the neighbours were talking about it and comparing notes, there was a knock on the door, which turned out to be the neighbour on the other side of the house as well. And he said that all his appliances had stopped working as well. Things were getting very strange, so one of them decided to ring the electricity board and ask them to call and sort out the problem. But when the electricity repairman came, he could find nothing wrong with the circuits in any of the houses or in any of the cables. Now things began to take an ominous turn. That Sunday night, whilst the man and his wife were in bed reading prior to settling down, they heard a frantic scurrying sound coming from the roof space above their heads. It sounded like a flock of birds had got trapped and were trying to get out. A little scared, but determined to sort this out, the man got up and opened the loft. He pulled the loft ladder down and climbed up to look into the space above. He switched on the light, but he could see nothing. However, the noise was still there. And as he peered into the gloom, he felt something brush his face. Scared, he climbed up right into the loft and looked around, but still he could see nothing. And still he could hear the scurrying, fluttering sound. Well, by now the man was scared, not so much because he couldn't see anything, but because there was something happening which he couldn't explain. He quickly climbed down the ladder again and closed the loft door. But the noise, if anything, was getting louder. So the couple got up and went downstairs. The noise, however, seemed to follow them. Wherever they went in the house, they seemed to be in the middle of an invisible flock of birds. As they were making a cup of tea, there was a knock on the front door. Wondering who could be calling at this time of night, it was about 11 o'clock, the man opened the door to be confronted by his neighbours. The woman was pale and trembling, and the man was having great difficulty in controlling the emotion in his voice. They came in and told the couple that there was a strange noise in their house which was frightening them. At this point, they noticed the fluttering sound, and the neighbour's wife gave a sharp cry of fear. It was the same noise that they could hear in their house. At first, they thought that it had followed them, but were soon put right on that fact. Fear seems to ease off when there are more than one or two people involved, and soon the four neighbours noticed that the fluttering noise was rapidly fading away. Not long after that, all was quiet, and about half an hour later, the neighbours stood up and made for the front door. The two women went first, whilst the two men discussed what they could do. Suddenly, one of the women gave a piercing scream, which brought the two men running. And what they saw was beyond anything that they'd ever experienced in their lives. For standing in the front of the door, barring their way, was the most fearsome creature that they'd ever seen. It could only be described as a sort of large bird. It had large black wings spread out as if to prevent anything passing it, and a head which resembled an eagle. Its eyes were two spots of evil red. The four people were unable to move, so great was their terror. Then one of the men picked up a briefcase which was lying in the hall and threw it at the beast. There was a blinding blue flash, and the thing disappeared, leaving behind it an awful stench of burning meat. By now, all thoughts of sleep had gone, and the four people tried to figure out what they'd just witnessed and what they could do about it. There was no doubt that whatever it was they'd seen was real. And there was no doubt either that the thing was not of this world. For some reason they couldn't fathom out, they had witnessed a ghostly visitation. By dawn, the four people had decided that at the risk of being laughed at, they'd find a medium or a clairvoyant and see if he or she could discover what was haunting them. They'd already decided that the strange happenings with their electrical appliances was connected in some way. So after about a week in which they heard the fluttering noise several times but didn't actually see the beast again, they found a medium who inspired trust in them, and they asked her to come and do what was necessary to rid them of the ghost. She turned up a couple of days later, and as soon as she entered the house of the first couple, she began to gasp for breath and shiver violently. She immediately detected a negative force which seemed to be the source of the trouble. She then went next door and felt the same sensations again. Well, to cut a long story short, she was able to find out certain information, and from this she concluded that whatever was haunting the neighbours could be removed. For this, she needed help, and this is where I come into the story, because she asked me if I would like to help her in her task. Now, even though I believe in the paranormal, I was a little skeptical of demonic possession. So the chance of possibly experiencing one was too good to miss. So I duly turned up a few days later, and we set about doing what was necessary to help these people. I have to admit that I didn't actually see anything, although I did hear the fluttering sound, and I did get the distinct feeling that there was something there which was beyond my experience to date. However, after a while, we were successful in clearing the house of that which was there. I never did discover exactly what had been in the house, but that in itself was not unusual. What was unusual was that a week or so later, I received another call from the medium. Apparently, the thing had reappeared, but not in the houses that we'd been to. No, it had manifested itself in the house on the other side and in the house next to that. Over a period of another 3 weeks, we, that's the medium and I, were called to 4 more houses, all suffering from the same thing. In each case, we managed to rid them of the thing, but the neighbourhood was never the same. The terror that they had all experienced seemed to draw them together in a way which is unusual in this country, and they made us swear that we would never reveal the location of the troubles, which of course we were happy to do. I've driven around the neighbourhood quite a few times since the events of 6 years ago, and I noticed the last time that one of the houses is up for sale, the first one in all that time. So let me just say that if you're looking for a nice 4-bedroom detached house in a pleasant estate, and you see one which dates from the 30s, take my advice. Ask if the neighbours are unusually friendly, because if they are, you might be looking round a house which has been the scene of something rather nasty. And I can't guarantee that whatever was there has been laid to rest permanently.